All right, let's dive in today, huh? We're going deep on two huge battles from World War II, Pearl Harbor and Midway. And we've got some really cool stuff to look at today. I'm ready not just to go over the events, but to really figure out why Japan did what they did, what they messed up on, and what we can learn from all this, especially about how important intelligence and just industrial power are in war.
You know what's crazy? People don't always realize this, but Japan's whole thing leading up to Pearl Harbor and Midway wasn't just like random stuff. It all came from this bigger picture of, well, their empire stuff, their goals in the early 1900s. I mean, to really get why they did what they did, we got to go back and look at how they wanted to take over Asia, especially China.
You're talking about the Second Sino-Japanese War, right? That was a pretty big deal already going on when this all started. And the more they pushed into Asia, the more they were stepping on the toes of the Western powers, especially us, the U.S.
Yeah, for sure. So the U.S. is like, hold up, and hits Japan with these embargoes, right?
All right.
Cuts off important stuff like oil and steel. Imagine trying to fight a war without that stuff. It's like trying to run a car without gas, right? Japan was feeling the heat and thought that going to war was the only way out.
Which brings us to Admiral Yamamoto. This guy, he's the brains behind Pearl Harbor. He figured if we hit the U.S. Pacific Fleet hard and fast, they'll have to negotiate with us. I remember learning about that and being like, whoa, bold move, man. Especially since, the U.S. was this huge industrial machine at the time.
Yeah, Yamamoto was rolling the dice, He thought if they just knocked us out of Pearl Harbor, we'd be too scared to fight a long war. I mean, he really messed up on that one. He thought we'd just fold. Totally misread us.
Okay, so December 7th, 1941, a day that, well, everyone knows. Over 350 Japanese planes, two waves hitting Pearl Harbor, 8 battleships messed up, some sunk, over 2,400 Americans dead, almost 200 planes destroyed. It looked like, well, a win for Japan, at least at first.
Yeah, looked good on paper, but not so much in reality. Pearl Harbor, sure, they won that battle, but they flunked the bigger picture.
Totally. Instead of scaring us off, it was like, hey, America, let's go. It made everyone patriotic and, well, want to fight. One thing that always gets me, though, is that they hit us hard, but Japan didn't take out our aircraft carriers and fuel depots. Why not go for the big stuff?
That's the thing. They didn't get how massive our industry was. We could rebuild, get new stuff, and make more weapons faster than they could dream of. It's like they brought a knife to a gunfight. They never stood a chance at keeping up with us, and they totally missed that.
So Pearl Harbor was this huge shock that, well, blew up in Japan's face. 6 months later, June 1942, we've got Midway. Japan still wants to kick us out of the Pacific, right? They're thinking, let's lure the rest of the U.S. Navy into a trap at Midway Island. Pretty high stakes, right?
Oh, yeah, no kidding. If Japan had won Midway, it would have been bad news.
Yeah.
Really bad. Our Pacific fleet would have been crippled for who knows how long. Could have changed everything. But there's a big twist coming, and it's one of the biggest lessons from these two battles. Intel, spying, knowing what the enemy's going to do.
Enter the code breakers. These guys were amazing. I mean, a guy named Joseph Rochefort, he and his team at Station Hypo, they cracked the Japanese naval codes. We knew their plan for Midway. We knew what they were going to do.
That changed everything. Admiral Nimitz, our guy, he knew it was coming. He set a trap for them. It was brilliant, using smarts to win the war.
So instead of walking into a trap, we were waiting. Our dive bombers, thanks to the code breakers, they caught Japan totally off guard and sank 4 of their aircraft carriers. Akagi, Kaga, Suryu, Hiru. Boom. That hurt, didn't it?
Yeah, Midway was like a punch in the gut for Japan. They lost over 300 planes, a bunch of their best pilots, all in one go. After Midway, it was basically downhill for them, and we started island hopping, getting closer and closer to Japan itself. Makes you think, what if they had just gone for the big stuff at Pearl Harbor? The carriers, the fuel, could have been a whole different story, at least for a while.
Yeah, it's one of those things you wonder about. What if taking out the carriers would have been a way bigger problem for us?
No doubt, our Pacific fleet would have been, really hurting. Would have given Japan a lot more time to, set up shop in the Pacific. We might have been in for a much longer, tougher fight.
And don't forget, the Second Sino-Japanese War, that was already happening when they hit Pearl Harbor. What Japan was doing in China, that was a big part of why things were so tense with the U.S.
Oh, yeah, totally. When they invaded Manchuria back in 31 and kept going into China, the whole world was like, uh-oh. The U.S. saw that as messing with the whole region, so they hit them with sanctions. Of course, that just made things worse between us.
It seems like Japan just, I don't know, miscalculated a lot of things. They didn't think we'd fight back so hard. They didn't get how much their attacks would actually make us want to fight, and they totally underestimated our industrial power.
They thought they could win quick and easy, which, come on, not against us, not with how much stuff we could produce.
Yeah.
And then, well, Midway showed how bad their intel was. They just weren't prepared.
It's a reminder that wars aren't won just on the battlefield, right? It's the factories, the labs, the spies, all that matters.
Exactly. It's like your industry and your intelligence, they're like secret weapons. They let you take a hit and bounce back, then come up with new stuff and outsmart the other guy. It's not just about being tough. It's about having, like, a backup plan.
Yeah!
A whole other level of strategy.
It's crazy to think how these old lessons still matter today, you know?
Right.
We're in a world where everything's connected, technology's going crazy, and there's like information warfare everywhere. Being able to change, learn, and see what's coming next, that's more important now than ever.
You hit the nail on the head. Pearl Harbor and Midway, sure, they were a long time ago. But they teach us a lot about fighting and winning, about bouncing back. And that matters for countries, businesses, even just people going through tough times. It's all about being smart and flexible.
It makes you wonder, like, what would Yamamoto think about today's world? You've got cyber attacks shutting down power grids, fake news messing with people's heads, and countries fighting with money instead of bombs.
You probably see the similarities, you know? It's all about connections, about being one step ahead, like chess, but with higher stakes.
You got to see the threats coming and be ready to switch things up.
And just like in chess, knowing your opponent is key. What do they want? What are they good at? What are they bad at? Japan, well, they were too cocky. They didn't understand Americans at all. That was their downfall.
They thought flexing their muscles would scare us off, but they didn't get it. Our ideals, the fact that we band together when someone attacks us, that's powerful stuff. They couldn't break us.
They thought they'd crush our spirit, but they did the opposite. We got mad, we got united, and we were ready to win no matter what. Japan couldn't handle that.
It's crazy how one event can change so much, you know. For a country, for the world. Pearl Harbor, it became this symbol for America, for our toughness, and it changed the whole course of history.
And Midway, people don't talk about it as much, but it shows how smart our military was, how important intel is. That win, that really turned the tide.
So we've talked about the strategies, the spies, the industrial power. But if we had to give our listeners just a few things to remember, what would you say? What really matters here?
If there's one thing that ties it all together, it's being able to adapt to change. Japan and the U.S. both had to deal with things changing fast, but Japan just couldn't keep up.
They kept doing the same thing, even when it wasn't working, and they paid the price.
Their early wins, they blinded them. They didn't see that the war was changing, that they needed to change too.
But we learned from our mistakes.
Right.
We changed how we fought. We used what we were good at. Being able to learn and adapt, that's a big lesson. And not just for war, but for everything.
Totally agree. Doesn't matter if it's personal stuff, work stuff, even global problems. Being able to learn, change, and grow, that's what makes the difference.
It's about being open to new things, questioning what you think you know, and always looking for new info to, like, sharpen your understanding.
And it's about knowing that messing up, yeah, it sucks, but it can teach you a lot. Pearl Harbor, as awful as it was, it made our Navy better. They got better prepared, better at intel, better at planning.
It's like they say, failing isn't the opposite of success. It's part of getting there.
I like that. It's not about not failing. It's about what you do after you fail, what you learn, and how you use it to make better choices next time.
So as we're wrapping up this look at Pearl Harbor and Midway, what's a one thing you want people to walk away with?
That's a good question. I think the big thing is history matters. Even the stuff that seems like ancient history, it's got lessons for us today. Pearl Harbor, Midway, they teach us about conflict, about being adaptable, about how tough people can be.
And those lessons, they're still important now. In a world where learning, adapting, and making good decisions is so important, we can learn a lot from these battles.
Absolutely. If we can learn from the mistakes of the past, maybe we could avoid making them again.
There's always more to learn from history.
Always.
You know, when you think about the scale of these battles, all those planes, those huge ships, all the lives lost, it's hard to really imagine it.
It's important to remember that behind all those numbers, the strategies, there were people with their own stories, their own hopes and dreams.
And those stories, that's what makes history real, right? The pilot who knew it was dangerous but flew anyway, the sailor fighting to save his ship, the families waiting for news, hoping for the best.
Exactly. We can get caught up in the big picture, the politics and the technology. But war, it's about people. And the people are the ones who feel it the most.
It reminds us that the decisions leaders make, they affect real people in big ways.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the human side of it all, even when we're looking back at it from like a historical point of view. We can't forget that.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. But you also see how strong people can be, right? Like courage, compassion, willing to sacrifice everything, even when things are, just awful.
You see it in the people who lived through it, the ones who picked up the pieces, rebuilt their lives and their towns, and ones who kept fighting for a better world.
And the people back home, keeping things going, working in the factories, dealing with shortages, never giving up hope.
It shows you what we can do when we come together, how strong we can be. It's pretty amazing.
So we've covered the strategies, the spies, the whole industrial side of things. But it's those stories, those acts of courage that really make you understand what war is really about.
I think you're right. That's a really important point and something we should keep in mind today with everything going on in the world.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Pearl Harbor and Midway, I'm thinking about how these events, they still shape how we think about war, strategy, and just being human. They're a warning, but also kind of inspiring, right? They show how bad things can get when we mess up, but also how strong people can be.
And maybe the biggest thing they teach us is that peace and diplomacy, trying to work things out,
Yeah.
that's always the best way. War, it's sometimes necessary, but it should always be the last option, never the first.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you learned something, that it made you think, and maybe it reminded you how important it is to understand the past. Because the past, it can help us deal with the present and the future.